The earth groaned beneath altars of stone, where men bowed to powers they carved with their own hands, to Dagon of the Philistines, whose body was part man, part fish, to Molech of Ammon, whose arms bore burning children, to Chemosh of Moab, thirsty for blood and conquest, to Asherah, the mother idol whose carved poles swayed on hilltops, and to Baal, the storm god, rider of clouds, bringer of rain, believed to speak in thunder and bless the soil with dew. Every nation had its pantheon, and every people raised their voices to a different name. Kings made treaties in the temples of idols, and carved heavens in the image of earth's desire. Even Israel, chosen by Yahweh, had turned her face to the wind-blown gods of her neighbors. She bowed at foreign altars, and her kings built sanctuaries to silence. But Yahweh was not like the others. He had no image, no carved form. He thundered from Sinai in fire, and whispered from the wilderness in wind. He alone had split the sea and made covenant in blood. He was not one God among many. He was Elohim above all Elohim. And though the nations swelled with gods, Israel was called to one name. This was not the age of atheism. It was the age of many thrones, but only one throne would stand. And when Israel limped between Yahweh and Baal, he did not send a legion nor raise an army. He sent a prophet. In the days when kings bowed to carved gods and altars burned to Baal beneath the high skies of Samaria, a hush had fallen upon the prophets of Yahweh. Their voices were buried beneath the ash of forbidden incense, and the people had turned their faces toward the gods of their neighbors. To Baal, the stormbringer, they cried out for dew and grain. To Asherah, the carved mother, they danced for womb and vine. High places flourished, covenant altars crumbled, and Yahweh's silence stretched across the land like an unbroken sky. Then a solitary man stepped from the hills of Gilead, weathered, unbending, eyes alight with Yahweh's fire. He came unbidden to the throne of Ahab, robe dusted with the wilderness, bearing thunder in his breath. As Yahweh Elohim of Israel lives, before whom I stand, he said, there shall be no mist of night nor drop of rain these years, unless I speak it so. There were priests who claimed Baal rode the clouds, who said his voice rumbled in the storm and his hands poured the rain. But the skies would close now, not by Baal's silence, but by Yahweh's command. Not a breath of dew, not a whisper of water. The battle had begun, and heaven would answer through drought. Then, like a whisper withdrawn into shadow, Elijah vanished. And the word of Yahweh came to him, not in storm, but in command. Go from this place, turn eastward, hide by the Wadi Cherith, beside the Jordan's winding breath. There, the brook would give him drink, and Yahweh had already summoned the winged ones. Ravens, black as silence, to bring him bread and meat at dawn, and again at twilight. So Elijah went, not in protest nor fear, but in obedience. He made his dwelling beside the wadi, where stones knew his footprints and reeds hushed his prayers. Morning by morning, the ravens came, bread in beak, flesh torn from the hidden feast of heaven. Evening by evening, they returned, faithful as the decree. And the prophet drank from the brook, the stream that still ran while the skies turned to brass. Here in hiddenness, Yahweh sustained the one he had sent. While kings schemed and altars smoked, while Baal's prophets cried to an empty sky, Yahweh fed his servant with silence and shadows. Creation obeyed, while the covenant was betrayed. But after many days the land grew harder, the wind more hollow. The brook too gave its last whisper and dried into dust, for no rain fell upon the face of the earth, just as the voice of Yahweh had spoken through his servant. Then the word of Yahweh came again to the prophet in hiding, not with thunder or flame, but with quiet instruction. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. There I have commanded a widow to sustain you. So Elijah rose and journeyed beyond the bounds of Israel, his feet dusted with exile, his spirit bound to the voice of Elohim. He passed into the land where Baal was king, where incense curled toward stone idols, where Jezebel had once walked as daughter and priestess. Yet Yahweh had chosen this house, this woman, this famine-bitten place, to show that his mercy burns brighter than borders, and his power speaks in foreign soil. At the gate of the city, he saw her, a widow gathering sticks, frail beneath the sky's hunger. The famine had carved hollows beneath her eyes, but her hands still reached for wood, for warmth, for the last act of a mother's love. He called out to her, "Bring me, I pray, a little water in a vessel that I may drink." And as she turned to go, his voice followed, "Also, bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." She halted, and her answer trembled like dry leaves. "As Yahweh your Elohim lives, I have no cake, but only a handful of meal in a jar, and a little oil in a cruse. I gather these few sticks now, that I may prepare it for me and my son, and we shall eat it, and then we shall die." But Elijah, steadfast, spoke with the fire of trust, "Do not fear. Go and do as you have said. But first, prepare for me a small cake from it, and bring it to me. Then make one for yourself and your son after. For thus says Yahweh Elohim of Israel, the jar of meal shall not be exhausted, and the cruse of oil shall not fail, until the day Yahweh gives rain upon the earth." And she obeyed the word of the prophet. She baked, and they ate, she, her son, and the man of Elohim. And the jar did not empty, nor did the oil run dry, day after day, in that famine-stricken land. For the word of Yahweh spoke abundance where there was none. And the woman outside the covenant became keeper of the prophet and witness to the Most High. But then, after these things, the son of the woman fell ill. His breath slowed, then ceased, until no life remained in him. Stillness took him, and silence followed. The widow turned to Elijah in grief and fire. "What have I to do with you, O man of the one Elohim? Have you come to remind me of my guilt and to bring death to my son?" Elijah said to her, "Give me your son." And he took the still child from her arms, carried him to the upper chamber where he dwelt, and laid him upon his own bed. The room held its breath. Then Elijah cried out to Yahweh, "O Yahweh, my Elohim, will you also bring evil upon this widow in whose house I sojourn by taking her son's life?" 3 times he stretched himself upon the child. 3 times the prophet wrapped himself around stillness, and 3 times he cried aloud, "O Yahweh, my Elohim, I beseech you, let the soul of this boy return within him." And Yahweh heard the voice of Elijah. The soul returned. The boy lived. From the edge of Sheol he was drawn back, snatched from the dim gate of silence, not by magic, nor right, nor merit, but by the pleading of one man's prayer and the breath of the Most High. Elijah took him in his arms again, descended the stair, and placed him into the arms of his mother. And the prophet spoke, "Behold, your son lives." Then the woman said, with tears like oil, "Now I know that you are a man of Elohim, and that the word of Yahweh in your mouth is truth." And in that upper room, death had tasted defeat, and the boy who descended from silence, returned from Sheol's edge, called back by the word of the Most High. And after many days, when the sky had forgotten rain and the land breathed dust, the word of Yahweh came again to Elijah, quiet but resolute. Go, show yourself to Ahab, for I shall send rain upon the face of the ground. So Elijah rose from the dry places and made his way toward the king. In Samaria, the famine was unyielding. Its silence screamed louder than thunder. The earth was cracked like old skin. Wells gaped empty. Children drank tears instead of water. Herds lay rotting in the fields. And Baal, the storm god, rider of clouds, remained mute in his temples, while smoke still rose to his breathless nostrils. Now Ahab had summoned Obadiah, steward of his house, a man who feared Yahweh exceedingly, though his loyalty was cloaked beneath courtly robes. For when Jezebel unsheathed her wrath against the prophets of Yahweh, Obadiah had hidden 100 of them in caves, by 50s, feeding them bread and water, light in the darkness, fire under stone. Even in Ahab's palace, Yahweh had kept a remnant. And Ahab said to him, Go through the land. Seek water, any spring, any wadi. Perhaps we shall find grass enough to spare our beasts. So the land was divided between them, 2 paths, 2 searchers. Ahab went one way, and Obadiah the other, alone. And on that dry road, Obadiah lifted his eyes. And there stood Elijah, dust on his cloak, fire in his gaze, the man whose word had stopped the skies. Obadiah fell to his face and cried out, Is it you, my lord Elijah? It is I, the prophet answered. Go, tell your master, Elijah is here. But Obadiah trembled and said, What sin have I committed, that you would hand your servant over to Ahab to be slain? As Yahweh your Elohim lives, there is no nation or kingdom where he has not sent to seek you. And when they said, He is not here, he made them swear it was true. And now you say, Go tell Ahab Elijah is here. But what if the Spirit of Yahweh takes you away, and I cannot find you? He will kill me. Yet I have feared Yahweh from my youth. Have you not heard what I did when Jezebel slaughtered the prophets? How I hid 100 of them, 50 by 50 in caves, and gave them bread and water. And now you say, Go to your Lord, and tell him Elijah is here. He will kill me. But Elijah said, Solemn sure, as Yahweh of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely appear before him today. So Obadiah went and brought word to Ahab, and Ahab came, robe of a king, heart of a rebel. He reigned over a land he could not water, a people he could not feed, and yet still bowed to Baal, whose altar stood tall in the palace of his queen. When his eyes met the prophet's form, he spat, Is it you, the troubler of Israel? Elijah stood like a storm unbent and answered, I have not troubled Israel. You have, you and your father's house, for you have forsaken the instructions of Yahweh and have gone after the Baalim. His words struck like flint against the drought-dried air. Now, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who dying at the table of Jezebel. Thus, the summons went out across the parched land. From high hills to hollowed villages, the people came, not for rain, but for fire. And so the war of gods was summoned. The heavens still withheld their voice, but the stage was set for flame. One mountain, one prophet, one holy name. So Ahab sent word through all the sons of Israel, and they gathered to the heights of Carmel. where earth meets the sky, where altars once rose and loyalties were torn by wind. There the prophets of Baal came, 450 in number, clad in crimson and chanting with tongues shaped by Canaan. With them came the silence of a nation divided in heart, limping between the covenant and the crowd, between the name and the names of many. Then Elijah came near to all the people, and his voice rose like thunder over stone. How long will you limp between two opinions? If Yahweh is Elohim, follow him. If Baal is, then follow him. But the people answered him not a word. Their lips were bound by fear. Their hearts were braided with compromise. They had not forgotten Yahweh's name, but they had bowed to Baal's spectacle. And Elijah said, I alone am left a prophet of Yahweh, just one. But the prophets of Baal, they are 450. Let them give us 2 young bulls. They shall choose one for themselves, cut it into pieces, and place it upon the wood, but lay no fire beneath it. I will do the same with the other. Then you shall call upon the name of your Elohim, and I shall call upon the name of Yahweh. And it shall be, the Elohim who answers by fire, he is Elohim. And the people said, the word is good. So Elijah turned to the prophets of Baal, cloaked in frenzy and incense. Choose for yourselves 1 bull. Prepare it first, for you are many. Call upon your Elohim by name, but do not place fire beneath the offering. So they took the bull that was given them and prepared it. And from morning until noon, they cried aloud, O Baal, answer us. They lifted their voices to the storm god, the rider of clouds, the one whom their fathers called Hadad. They beat the drums and danced in spirals, cutting the sky with cries. But there was no voice. There was no one who answered. Only the wind, only the dust. Still they danced and skipped about the altar they had built, hoping to wake the silence with blood and spectacle. At noon, Elijah mocked them, his voice cutting like flint. Cry louder. Surely he is an Elohim. Perhaps he is meditating, or has turned aside to relieve himself. Maybe he is journeying far, or he sleeps and must be awakened. So they cried louder, and in frenzy they slashed themselves with swords and lances, as was their custom, until their blood mingled with the dust. The altar ran red, but the sky did not answer. The god of storm did not stir. The cloud rider did not descend. The thunder they worshipped had turned to silence. And still they prophesied, not words from heaven, but hollow madness dressed in sacred robes. They swayed and raved and convulsed at the altar, their voices hoarse, their strength undone. As noon passed and the shadows began to stretch, they raved on until the time of the evening offering. But still, there was no voice, no one who answered, no one who gave heed. And Mount Carmel stood in stillness, holding its breath, waiting for fire. Then Elijah turned to all the people and called out, "Come near to me." And the people gathered around him, dry lips, silent hearts, eyes filled with dread and wonder. And there upon the mount he began to mend what had been torn down, the shattered altar of Yahweh, long fallen beneath the weight of forgetfulness. He took 12 stones, one for each tribe of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of Yahweh had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." With these he rebuilt the altar, in the name of Yahweh, each stone laid with care, not only to restore, but to remember. Each stone echoed the forgotten covenants, each a name once carved in blessing, now called back from the dust. Around it he carved a trench, wide enough to hold seed, not for planting grain, but for sowing fire. The old altar stood once more, not merely a pile of stones, but a prayer rekindled in the shape of obedience. Then he set the wood in place, laid the pieces of the young bull upon it, and said, "Fill 4 jars with water. Pour it over the offering and the wood." They did so. "Do it again," he said, and they poured again. "Do it a 3rd time." And water streamed down once more, drenching sacrifice, soaking wood, spilling over stone, filling the trench below. It soaked the altar until it wept. The people watched. The altar dripped. The ground was flooded. And the prophets of Baal, breathless and bloodied, stood helpless in their silence. No voice had answered them. No fire had come. Their storm god had not stirred. Now all eyes turned. Then, at the time of the evening offering, Elijah the prophet stepped near and lifted his voice, not with frenzy, but with solemn fire. "O Yahweh, Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are Elohim in Israel, and I am your servant. And all these things I have done at your word. Answer me, O Yahweh, answer me, that this people may know that you, Yahweh, are Elohim, and that you yourself are turning their hearts back again." And before the wind could shift, before breath could break the silence, the fire of Yahweh fell. Not a flame, but a fury, not a flicker, but a furnace from the heavens. It devoured the ascent offering, the wood, the stones, and the very soil. It licked the water from the trench until not a drop remained. It scorched the dust into light. Heaven did not whisper. It consumed. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and cried out, "Yahweh, He is Elohim! Yahweh, He is Elohim!" And in that blaze, the covenant stirred again, and the name of Elijah, he who calls fire from the sky, was sealed in awe. For it had happened as it did in days of old, when Abel's offering was taken in flame, when Solomon's temple was baptized in fire. And now again, Yahweh had spoken in flame, and the people remembered what they had forgotten. And in the high place where idols had danced and silence had reigned, the mountain shook, not from thunder but from worship. The altar stood no longer as stone, but as witness, and the fire, which once burned in the bush and on the mount, now burned in the people's bones. Then Elijah turned to the trembling crowd and thundered, "Seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape." And the people, stirred by awe and flame, rushed upon them. They were taken, everyone, and led down to Wadi Cherith, and there, by Elijah's hand, they were struck down in judgment beneath the flowing brook. Wadi Cherith ran red that day, not with the rage of a man, but with the justice of a covenant renewed. As in days of old, when Joshua purged the land of defilement, so now Elijah wielded the sword of righteousness. The brook bore their blood to the sea, as if the earth itself sought cleansing from the stain of idolatry. Then Elijah said to Ahab, whose silence was heavy with shattered pride, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a rushing downpour." So Ahab turned to his feast, but Elijah ascended again to the summit of Mount Carmel, where his feet had seen fire, and there he bowed low to the earth, placing his face between his knees. He became as dust before Yahweh, a prophet bent like the arc of the heavens, trembling with intercession. He said to his servant, "Go now, look toward the sea." The lad climbed and gazed toward the great horizon, and returned, saying, "There is nothing." 7 times Elijah said, "Go again." 7 times the prayer ascended unseen. 7 times, as in the days of Jericho, when walls fell with faith, not force. And it came to pass, on the 7th time, the lad returned with breath quickened, behold, a thick cloud, small as a man's palm, rising from the sea. And Elijah answered, Go, say to Ahab, harness your chariot and descend, lest the downpour hinder you. And then it came to pass. The heavens gathered their garments of storm, the clouds grew heavy and black. The wind awakened, and a great downpour poured forth, not from Baal's voice, but from Yahweh's silence, now broken. As Ahab rode toward Jezreel, the hand of Yahweh came upon Elijah. He girded his cloak to his waist and ran ahead of the chariots, wind in his garments, until he reached the gates of Jezreel before the king. He was a man, yet he prayed, and the sky, once sealed, opened. The earth, once cracked, drank deep. Elijah, the servant of Yahweh, ran soaked with the storm that he had summoned by bowed knees, swift as fire, clothed in rain, the prophet whose soul had touched both drought and deluge. And in the storm, the land remembered its maker. Then Ahab came before Jezebel and told her all that Elijah had done, how fire had fallen from the sky, how the prophets of Baal had perished by the sword. And when she heard it, the queen's heart became iron. Her breath was a curse. Her soul, steeped in the rites of Sidon and the fury of Baal, recoiled not in repentance, but in vengeance. She sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, Thus shall the Elohim do to me, and more also, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of theirs. Elijah, who had called down fire, who had outrun the storm, feared, not the armies of Israel, but a single word from the lips of a queen who bore Baal's shadow. He rose and fled for his life, fleeing the land of Israel to Beersheba in Judah. There, at the borders of covenant in exile, he left his servant behind, burdened, bowed, and alone. He pressed one day further into the wilderness. No map, no direction, just a way. When he could walk no further, he sat beneath a solitary broom bush, its branches thin against the burning sky. There, beneath that fragile shade, he sank down, not in rebellion but in despair. He prayed not for rain, not for fire, not for nations to turn, but for his own end. It is enough now, O Yahweh. Take my life from me, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down, as if surrender were a kind of sleep. But heaven did not forsake him. A messenger touched him, saying, Arise and eat. And when Elijah opened his eyes, he saw beside his head a cake, baked on glowing stones, and a cruse of water, warm bread, quiet mercy, offered without thunder. He ate and drank, and lay down again, as if the weariness had not lifted. A second time, the messenger of Yahweh returned, not with rebuke, not with command, but with compassion. He touched him once more and said, Arise and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So Elijah rose, and this time he walked. In the strength of that food, bread not of earth, water not drawn from well but from the storehouses of grace, he walked 40 days and 40 nights to the mountain of Elohim, Horeb. Through desert silence and starless night, through thoughts unsaid and prayers unspoken, he walked. And in his weary echo, the shadow of Moses lingered. For once again, a prophet crossed the wilderness. Once again, a man of Yahweh ascended Horeb, not to call down fire, but to wait for the voice. In the hush between despair and revelation, Elijah pressed on, carried by bread of angels and the silence of God, not yet spoken. And he came to a cave upon the holy mount, a cleft in the rock, still and dark, and there he lay down to lodge for the night. But the word of Yahweh came to him, not in dream nor thunder, and asked him, What are you doing here, Elijah? He answered, weary and burning with sorrow, I have been zealous, yes, exceedingly zealous for Yahweh Elohim of hosts. The sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They have thrown down your altars. They have slain your prophets by the sword. And I alone am left. And now they seek my life as well. Then the voice said, Go out and stand on the mount before Yahweh. And behold, Yahweh was passing by. A great and tearing wind rushed forth. It split mountains, shattered crags, and roared with ancient force. But Yahweh was not in the wind. Then the earth began to quake, trembling the bones of the mountain. But Yahweh was not in the quake. Then came fire, fierce, consuming, wild, and bright. Yet Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound, thin, silent, still. A voice, like a breath before speech. A whisper of gentle stillness, the silence that remains after heaven exhales. A stillness so sacred, even the stones dared not echo. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and stepped forward to the mouth of the cave. And the voice came again, soft yet sovereign. What are you doing here, Elijah? And again he spoke, I have been zealous, yes, exceedingly zealous for Yahweh Elohim of hosts. The sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, demolished your altars, slain your prophets with the sword, and I alone remain, and they seek my soul to take it. Then Yahweh said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, of Abel-Meholah, anoint him as prophet in your place. And it shall come to pass, whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall slay, and whoever escapes Jehu, Elisha shall slay. Yet I will preserve 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. And Elijah listened, not just to the instruction, but to the grace behind it, the covenant still breathing, the remnant still hidden like embers beneath ash. In the hush of the holy, Yahweh revealed what fire could not, that divine power is not always thunder. Sometimes it is presence. Sometimes it is a whisper. And so the prophet who called fire and fled from death stood in silence, cloaked in whisper and commission. For Yahweh, who once thundered on Sinai, now moved in the stillness of breath, and the prophet heard. And it came to pass, when the day drew near that Yahweh would take Elijah in a tempest to the heavens, that Elijah and Elisha walked together from Gilgal. The air was heavy with unspoken farewell, and yet no mourning had touched the lips of the prophet. Elijah turned to his companion and said, Stay here, I pray, for Yahweh has sent me to Bethel. But Elisha replied, As Yahweh lives, and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. And so they went down together to Bethel, the place where Jacob once dreamed of heaven opened, where stones were anointed and vows made to Elohim. There, the sons of the prophets came out to Elisha and whispered, Do you know that today Yahweh will take your master from over you? And he answered, his voice low with grief, I know it also. Hush. Then Elijah said again, Stay here, I pray, for Yahweh has sent me to Jericho. But Elisha answered as before, unwavering, As Yahweh lives, and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So they came to Jericho, city once felled by trumpet and faith, now silent beneath prophetic footfall. Again, the sons of the prophets drew near and said, Do you know that today Yahweh will take your master from over you? And again Elisha replied, "I know it also. Hush." There were silences that honor the holy. Then Elijah said a third time, "Stay here, for Yahweh has sent me to the Jordan." But Elisha's vow did not waver. "As Yahweh lives, and as your soul lives, I will not leave you." And they walked on, the two of them, step by step, like Abraham and Isaac once walked toward the unseen fire. 50 sons of the prophets watched from a distance, eyes wide and hearts hushed, as Elijah and Elisha stood by the waters of the Jordan, the river of crossings, of covenant, of change. Then Elijah took his mantle, that sacred cloth worn by storms and silence, folded it, and struck the water, and the river obeyed. It parted, this way and that, so that they crossed on dry ground, as the fathers once had. And Elisha's feet walked not just a path, but a passage into inheritance. When they had passed over, Elijah turned, his voice gentled by nearing departure, and said, "Ask what I shall do for you, before I am taken from you." And Elisha, with a heart bold and broken, answered, "I pray, let a double portion of your spirit be upon me. Not twice the power, but the rightful share of a firstborn heir, a cry for legacy, not prestige." Elijah said, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so. If not, it shall not be." And it came to pass, as they walked on and spoke together, behold, the sky cracked with brilliance. A chariot of fire appeared, and horses of fire, roaring like the whirlwind, crowned in flame. They did not merely arrive, they divided, and Elijah was taken up in a tempest into the heavens, not by death, but by glory, not claimed by Sheol, but clothed in fire, ascending beyond the reach of dust. Elisha saw it, and he cried aloud, his voice torn by awe and sorrow, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen." Not merely a man was lost, but a guardian, a pillar, the unseen army of Yahweh, embodied in one who dared stand alone. Then he saw him no more. He tore his garments in grief, rending the cloth of mourning, but not in despair. He reached down and took up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen, a symbol, yes, but more, the breath of the Spirit now resting on new shoulders. He returned to the bank of the Jordan, the river that had parted for prophets and priests. He struck the waters with the mantle and cried, "Where is Yahweh, the Elohim of Elijah?" And when he struck, the waters parted once more, this way and that, and Elisha crossed over, not as a servant, but as a prophet. The Spirit did not perish with the man. It passed like wind to one who waited. And Elijah, for his zeal, was not claimed by death, but by flame, by whirlwind, by heaven's own chariot. He went up in fire and shall come again. This video was presented in accordance with the original Hebrew text and was carefully crafted to reflect the authenticity of the scriptures. I consider this video very important. I am a dedicated and attentive student in the study of ancient texts. Narratives like this can strengthen the faith of those who believe and fill the hearts of those who study. On this channel, I am committed to offering biblical narratives and artistic representations of biblical, apocryphal, and non-canonical works. If you're interested in this subject, then this is the right place for you. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and choose your next video to continue the journey. See you in the next video.